Well, thanks for coming, everyone. And I'd like to introduce Felipe Montoya and Maria Grimaldi, who are going to be talking to us about Open edX hooks. So,
Hi. Welcome to Mastering Open edX Hooks, Insights of Innovation from Real-World Usage. The main goal of this presentation is to give you some insight on how the community has been using the framework in the last couple of years and what's next for it. So yeah, let's get started. Can you change it? Okay, so first we're gonna just do a quick refresher of what the framework is about and some essential concepts. So back in 2020, a proposal was created that turned into an OEP 50, called Hooks Extension Framework, that basically said that this new extension point was going to allow plugin developers to hook into the platform and extend it without modifying it, which is key. And that's done through hooks. Hooks is just a place in the code base where you can hook into and extend it. You can extend it in two different ways by using Open edX events or Open edX filters. With Open edX events, because the definition, they're built on top of Django signals, so they act as a notification. You can't actually interact with the process that's sending the event, so you can't modify the application's behavior. And yeah, because it's built on top of Django signals, it behaves similar as Django signals, but it's standardized to work in the Open edX ecosystem. And with filters, you can actually use them to modify the application flow, the application's behavior, where they're defined. And this framework was implemented with two Python libraries, Open edX filters and Open edX events. What's defined there are first the tooling needed to execute each of the hooks and the definition of a filter and an event. If I want to create a new event for, let's say, enrollment, then I will have to create it in the library and then import that code and that library into the service where I want to send the event. And that happens as well for filters. So that was a quick rundown and just a refresher about what the framework is about. And just a quick vocabulary, because I usually use different terminology. When I'm referring to events, event definition, receivers, handlers, and listeners, I'm always talking about Open edX events. And when I'm saying filter definition, pipeline steps, and pipeline, I'm always talking about Open edX filters. So next up is, okay, so working. The evolution of the Hooks extension framework. First, we're gonna just review a few milestones that has happened since in 2021, the first batch of Open edX events was integrated in edX platform initially, and I think it was a couple of months later, the first batch of filters was included. So what has happened since then? So in 2022, we received our first contributions in Open edX events and Open edX filters outside contributions beside edX that was maintaining. We were the only ones maintaining and building the framework back then. And that same year, I think it was an ADR that adopted Open edX events as part of the event bus architecture. The same year, the OEP 50 passed. Back then, when the OEP was created, it was merged as provisional, and at this moment was changed to accepted. As well, we released the first version of Open edX events, acknowledging that was being actually used in production environments. So we basically told the community that the library was stable enough to use. And that same thing happened a little bit later, and we really think that the adoption of the event bus accelerated the growth of Open edX events, and maybe that's why there's a time difference of releasing version 1 in events and filters. And by mid-2023, we've had in both libraries over 100 contributions, counting ours and from outside the community. And by June 2024, we had over 200 contributions in Open edX events and over 150 in open edX filters. So those are a few milestones of what has happened. A lot has happened, but we wanted to highlight those, so it gives you some context of what's next. So, okay, next up is adoption by the open edX community. So we want to view the adoption of the framework in looking at two different things. First, contributions to the framework to both libraries, open edX events, and open edX filters. Because that told us that the community is taking the framework and adapting it to work for themselves in a maintainable way. And we also want to look at the extensions that were built on top of the framework, so we get an idea of what the community is doing and what we need to improve. So first we're going to look at some stats from each repository. So here are the stats for open edX events contributions. And when I say contributions, it's just a pull request with the status closed. So we have here the blue graphic tells us the total number, the accumulated number of contributions in open edX events, and the purple one is the new contributions, and the period of time is about every 6 months. So we see that here between 2022 and 2023, the new amount of contributions increased, and we think that happened as well because the tooling for the event bus was being added at the time, and then decreased when it stabilized. Of course, not only the tooling of the event bus was happening, people were adding new events, but I think that accelerated as well the amount of contributions, and then it stabilized till this year. So we have an average, and this was I generated that number with just taking into account the last 2 months. We have an average of 50 new pull requests every 6 months. And today, as I mentioned before, we have 282 pull requests with status closed in the library. So we took those contributions and classified them per organization because we wanted to know that we were not the only ones that were contributing as well, and those numbers were also part of the rest of the organizations in the community. So that's why we're showing this graph. As I said, the people that were in charge to implement the tooling for the event bus was TU. So that's why we that implemented the basic tooling for open edX events to work, and TU have kind of the same amount of contributions because they actually added and maintained the event bus necessary tooling in open edX events. So next up is open edX filters contribution stats. These look a little bit different, and as I said, the growth between those two are different. I don't think we can compare them because of the event bus adoption. But here we see that we have over 160. That number, I think I looked at it mid-June. And by 2023, we had an increase, and then it stabilized as well, the number of contributions. And we have an average of 29 pull requests every 6 months. So a bit, it's half what's open edX events, but as I mentioned, open edX events played a key role in the event bus adoption, so that could explain it. And here we also see a bit of a difference in contributions from outside contributions. We first built the library, and maybe that's why we have a lot of contributions to the framework. And when we implemented the library, we also implemented a batch of filters as well as events. And that could explain why we have the most amount of contributions. But I think the community is catching up. Not as quick as on OpenEdX events. And again, that could be because of the OpenEdX bus adoption. But yeah, I think we're getting there. So now, we want to look at extensions so we can understand how the community is using the framework. We understand that an extension is a solution built on top of the framework, on top of OpenEdX events definitions or OpenEdX events filters. We scattered the internet, mainly using GitHub UI and the GraphQL and REST API from GitHub as well, to generate a list of extensions. This is just to get an idea. I don't think we got all of them because the process wasn't really well established. At the end, I'm gonna leave just some references of what I used to generate this list, but it was around 50 extensions that we found. We had a list of search terms that specified that an extension is being built with the framework. For example, if I'm building a pipeline step and that's part of what you can use with a filter, then I was looking for pipeline step in the GitHub UI and with the rest of the APIs. So that's what we did to generate the list. We probably missed some. But yeah, those are easy to find, and they're public, so that's why we found them. And here are some of them. They're not all of them. As I said, we found 50, almost 50. And okay, I forgot to mention that we classified them into OpenEdX events solutions and OpenEdX filter solutions. And I found this really interesting, because even though the OpenEdX events has more traffic, we found, and this might not be 100% accurate because the number is kind of the same, similar, but we found that 23 solutions were built on top of OpenEdX events and 26 solutions were built on top of OpenEdX filters. So yeah, it's just something I found interesting. OpenEdX events offer communication between services, and maybe we have a lot of contributions because the definitions that were there were not enough to communicate between services, but they are enough to communicate between components. And the definitions that we have in OpenEdX filters, maybe they are enough so people can actually modify the application's behavior with what's there already. So that could explain why people is not adapting the framework as much, at least that library. So here we're gonna go into detail. We're not gonna go into detail with each of these extensions because there are a lot, but we selected a few of them and the organizations that implemented them. And I actually reviewed this list. The list is gonna be linked at the end. And I reviewed the list, and we selected a few use cases that were pretty different, and they showcased what we can actually do with the framework. I think that getting the list of extensions built on top of the framework is really useful for people adopting it for their solutions so they can see what they can do. It's pretty difficult to generate a list just thinking about all the possibilities of things that we could do with the framework. So I think this time I just wrote a script with ChatGPT help, but we could automate this process because I found it really useful for people adopting the framework to see, okay, my solution looks like this, how can I do it? What's the process of making a decision for adopting the framework? So that's why I really think this is really important. So We're gonna go through these 4 extensions. We're gonna just talk about them a bit, and yeah. So the first one is about instructor dashboard integrations. So a few things that we need to know first is that first, the instructor dashboard is legacy UIs, server rendering, and the hooks framework, as it is right now, it works in the backend. So since the instructor dashboard is still part of the backend, we could add a new filter that allowed us to extend the tabs that were in the instructor dashboard. The structure dashboard is basically just a list of sections, and each section has a fragment, and that fragment is rendered in the instructor dashboard. So the filter accepting just the context of the view, of the instructor dashboard view, and from there we take the list of sections and we can add new sections to render. So that was done to integrate the visual aspect of aspects into the LMS. And there's a level of integration, because when you get into the report section, you don't need to sign in, and the report shows data from the course. So what we did, or what this person did, I was actually kind of involved in this, so I kind of know what it is, was to pass information into the template that was going to be shown with a guest token and the course ID. So when you load the report, what you see is you don't have to log in, so there's an integration there, and you don't have to filter by the course because it's already done. So that's the kind of things that you could do with this filter in particular. I have other use cases, like we've integrated other open source software like OnTask that lets you manage actions based on data. We integrated Lime Survey as well. And we actually have integrated just new applications that the instructor could use and could interact just with a plugin. So next up is, I called it runtime reconfigurations to fit customer needs. That's basically what you do with a filter. But this is an interesting case. When the standard used for real-time events is XAPI, and it's really opinionated. So for example, when you're describing an action related to grading, the verb use is earned. But what happens if you're integrating OpenEdX with data that you already have, and you just for some reason in the organization you use another verb for earned? This actually happened. So and this happened in the events routing backend. There are a few filters that let you manipulate the XAPI fields, so you can change them in runtime with your own filter. That happened with earned, that this verb deferred from what was being used, and it was replaced with rated, for example. And in this specific example, I'm talking about the display name for objects. It comes in a language, and I think it's like language and the language code. But sometimes you don't use the default in event routing backends, again, is EN, English. But some organizations need to specify that's American English. So that's something as well that you could use. I linked the documentation for this, and I'm not an expert, so I'm just guiding. I reviewed the code, read the documentation, and I'm just explaining it here. So if you want to go and see how that works in detail, just go and check out the documentation. And now, some use cases around synchronization between applications and components, application components, or between services. We have the taxonomy connector implementation. Basically, and this I specify here that was built on top of OpenEdX events, but actually used OpenEdX filters as well, and I can explain it. There's a filter that allows you to modify the vertical block. So a form was added to students to verify skills. So when they verify a skill, they verify it, and these tags are added with OpenEdX filters, so they are modifying it in runtime. When I, as a student, click on the skill and an event is sent through the event bus, course discovery reads it and updates the database depending on what just happened. Again, there is a documentation if you want to know more. There's an ADR actually that helped me understand what was really happening here. It's pretty interesting. And the last one we're going to go is, this is pretty similar to the previous one, but is with another service, credentials. And again, that was documented in an ADR, so that helped me understand what was happening. Basically, when a certificate is generated in the LMS, an event is fired, then again, it goes through the event bus, and then credentials receives the event, and then starts the credentials process generation. Okay, so I reviewed the list with 50 items, and I took some things that I found pretty useful for adopters when implementing their extensions on top of OpenEdX events and filters. So we're going to go through them. They're not pretty complex, but I do think it'll help people to easily transition and implement their extensions. So they is more easy to debug, to implement, to test, and to maintain over time. So first is configurability. And this happens for both, for OpenEdX events and filters. Both are executed in process anytime an action where they're defined happens. So let's take as an example the instructor tab, the superset tab. So if I add a new superset tab, if I configure this extension, it's going to be rendered every time for all courses. So I might not want that for all types of users, or I might not want that for all courses. So we've done that. We've done this actually, and it's preferable to implement a strategy of knowing when to render and when not to. And that happens as well with OpenEdX events where you have an integration with webhooks. Maybe I don't want to send everything that happens, but I want to send what happens with admin users, or it could happen as well that I want to make the filter, the new feature available just for a few users until I know it's stable enough. That's pretty common actually. So the next thing is clear and consistent login. Currently, and this happens mainly I think in OpenEdX filters, is that you might have a few filters. You might have 4 filters. You might have any amount of filters running at the same, well, they don't run at the same time, it's a sequence, but you want to know what's happening. And because this and OpenEdX events is designed to not break in production environments, it might be difficult to debug. So we strongly recommend to just log every action that happens. And with OpenEdX filters especially, when you modify the application's behavior, and there are a few use cases where I'm preventing the enrollment of a user, or I'm preventing the registration of a user for auditing process, it's a pretty good thing to, okay, this user was denied access because we could encounter issues just in production, so it will be easier to debug. And I have to admit that we need a lot of tooling to do that. So in the meantime, it is good to implement logging strategies. It has happened to me mainly in Destructor Dashboard, because we've built a lot of them, that sometimes it just doesn't render and the new tab doesn't show and you don't really know why. And if you didn't find key places to put login in your code, then it's going to be harder, even harder to reproduce the bug in other environments. So the next one we have is error handling. For OpenEdX filters, I've seen that there are a few filters that still interact with templates that render with Django, and you can actually render that message in the view, so it's pretty useful to give enough information of what's happening. Oh, by the way, those are screenshots from real usage, so you might find your plugin there. And with events, and mainly with ones that interact with external services that you don't really know how stable they are, you might want to implement a retry solution. So yeah, that we've seen as well. The other one I want to highlight is comprehensive testing. Since OpenEdX events and OpenEdX filters, they are both lightweight libraries, you can actually install them in your plugin. And that makes testing the integration between the tooling of events and the tooling of filters pretty easy. So you know, for example, in this that we're seeing, I know with this test that when a filter runs, well, the filter that I'm using and I'm building on top of runs, my pipeline, that's the thing that's running, it works. First, it returns what it needs to return. And yeah, that also avoids, or it gives you a sense of security, because it's recommended against to test against edX platform, or it's not that easy. So this could work as an integration test. So yeah. And next up is performance considerations. And when you're using OpenEdX filters, what you're basically doing is injecting code into what already exists. So that's going to add up to the execution time. So you need to, when you're implementing a filter, you need to be aware of the calculations you're doing. Maybe that's something you could do previously and then fetch during the filter's execution. That will be great, so you don't add too much to the execution time. And as well, it is a common practice. It's not just with events. I've seen it happen in the platform with Django signals, to receive an event and just to trigger a task, an async task. So because the process is not waiting for a response, it is just, okay, just do that over there and I'm going to continue with the execution. And the last one is avoid import core pattern. Importing from a mainly we've had experience with importing from edX platform when we have to do some things. Speaking from experience, that's pretty difficult to maintain over time. So it is recommended against to do so. And I think what we should do is to list all the options we have to implement what we're doing, and yeah, just try to compare that to the maintenance cost of importing from the platform. That I can say that's hard, maintaining over time, updating it, and well. And I use this example, this filter, because in there, they're just using things that are passed through arguments. The methods that are used are from the block object, the context. So if you're implementing a filter, in this case, you can pass the arguments that you need, and that would avoid to have to import things from edX platform to get objects, to get the block, to get the course. So yeah, that should be something to consider in these scenarios. And yeah, so now next up is Felipe. That's gonna talk about what's next for the framework.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Maria. So that's what has been happening up to now. So the issue we face sometimes as maintainers of the hooks framework is that we are experts in the hooks framework. So we have no idea. Like, we solved most of our use cases already, and now we need to know what use cases we are missing. So we sent out a developer feedback survey, and we got 20 responses. And if you're sitting here and you have used the framework and you haven't answered, please go. Like, I'll show you the link in a second. But we had total 20 responses, and mostly the overall experience was rated 7 or more, like 8+, which is a great success from our vantage point. And we had responses from 6 different organizations that were saying, this is not too bad. That's good. Good overall experience, and we got a lot of feedback saying the documentation is not good enough. And that, retrospectively, it makes sense. We didn't write so good documentation because we know it very well, but we should do better, definitely. Actually, 6 out of the 7 people that said documentation needs to be better suggested specific improvements that we should make. And then 3 more out of the 20 said we need better tooling, and especially geared towards better debugging tools. So yeah, we hear you. Definitely we need to work on that, and I'll show you what we're trying to do in a second. This is the link to the survey, so please answer it or take it from the QR. Because we're not done yet, and definitely we aren't. And yesterday we spoke like the whole day about the extensibility story for the front end, and now I'm taking the takeaway for me is like extensibility at the front end is part of the hooks framework. This is not just a Python library, it's the way you hook into the platform and extend it somewhat. So we are trying to take that into, yesterday we talked a lot about how the experience of developing these libraries could inform the front end, but we also need to be listening there to see what's coming up that we are not looking at. We need to ensure as well that there is a well-rounded use of hooks. We focused on learning, and then we started doing authoring, but we haven't done the one event or hook about or filter about credentials or course discovery. Those are untapped. That's untapped territory and like unmapped, uncharted. We need to go there. And we also need a roadmap for hooks evolution. So part of what we did was we took, to the best of our understanding, the responses from the survey, and we created them and we put them as issues both in the OpenEDX and the OpenEDX events and the OpenEDX filters repositories. So if you answered the survey and you suggested something specifically, expect to see it here, go there, continue the conversation, because we don't want to forget that. We want to actually go and improve the things that you're asking us to improve. I can't promise that we will make it happen or the time it will take. The time it will take, but I'm promising that we're not forgetting about those. We're not ignoring that feedback. So yeah, some to summarize. There has been a steady number of contributions over time. Over like 6 months period, every release we see that contributions are maintaining. It has been adopted by different organizations, which for me, and for me personally, who wrote the original white paper, that means we won. If edX disappears tomorrow, someone else might take those flags and just continue moving the evolution of hooks. There has been approximately 50 extensions built to date, and we'd love to hear more, probably having a registry, even the survey form, if it's a different survey, but just send a quick note saying, we built this on top of that, or we need a different filter. We're always trying to listen for that feedback. And we have seen contributions to adapt the libraries in ways that we didn't think of at the beginning. And that also means like someone adopted this and said, this is not good enough, I'm going to make it better. And that's also a big win. Like that means people already understand this enough to want to change it in ways that work better for them. So with that, we really thank you for your time, and we're happy to hear any questions. But to get started with that, I'd like to ask you, the whole audience, what would you like to see in the hooks framework coming forward? And we'll try to answer as better as we can.
Thank you. Really good stuff. Yeah, like it was painful it's still painful like sometimes to extend the platform. That makes it a lot better. So my question, I've never used the hook platform like hook framework yet, but the immediate thing that I've seen is that, does it have debug logging before and after? Like on DevStack, for example, it's useful before an event is executed. And to that, what happens in the case of an error exception? Let's say my plugin went went wrong. What happened to the platform? That's it.
Yes,
Well, for events, there is a log after an event is sent. So an event is sent, and the log basically says, okay, this event was sent, and these receivers were executed. Locally, we use the method of Django signals that when the event fails, it actually raises the exception. In production environments, that doesn't happen. So that's like the basic debugging tooling we have there. For filters, there is a configuration that you could use to make it fail, but I think we're lacking documentation on that. But yeah, it's called failed silently. And I think people copy and paste the configuration and they don't really know what it does. But when fail silently, I don't remember if it's true or false. It actually raises an exception, and at least you can see what's happening. But we don't have logging before and after each pipeline step or each function that's going to be executed in the pipeline that we actually need.
That's why one of the takeaways was log it. Like just put log yourself at the moment, and if it grows in the way that we need to put those in the library, then we'll put them. But the idea is like we have faced that pain before, and we recommend that you put your logs before and after at least. Yeah.
So yesterday during the front-end talk, there was this option of using default values and skipping default values. I have implemented one of the filters that you were showcasing, and wherein we render HTML and then modify the HTML and whatnot. So my question is, does filters plan to introduce something similar to that, wherein you could choose to denote a block of code, let's say with respect to enrollment, you say this is the logic that is implemented by default, but I want to substitute it first. I don't know, enterprise learners or like some other different types of learners who have a very different, distinct way of enrolling things. Then I want to skip this entire business logic and implement my own custom business logic. Is that something that's possible, or it's something that's been thought about?
So the default for all the filters right now is to be empty. So there's nothing to default like process right now. All like when you get started, all the pipeline steps are basically an empty list. So right now there isn't, but I can see cases in the future where we want to like take code that right now lives in the core and is usually behind a feature flag and put it there and say, you can also start by having some filters already pre-populated, and then you would want to change it. It's not the same as just keep default false, because you still have it in your settings. So keep default false will be equivalent to saying, I don't want to run this pipeline step, and just comment it out.
I have a comment and a question while we're waiting. First, the comment is that I've been really impressed by how Maria and Felipe have involved the community at every step of the way in development of the hooks and filters framework, and I think it's exemplary. So thanks to you and the team at edX for the way that you implemented this. I think it's really cool. And then my question is there anything in the core platform that you would love to migrate to hooks and filters that's top of mind?
Thank you, and that was not planned, but I'd like to answer to your comment first, and that was when we started. Now it feels like we are here as a community discussing things, but in 2020 when we started, we were this tiny company trying to put something in the core, and our experience previously was that even sometimes we put things in the core, and 6 months later they would be gone. Like someone found it and was like, nah, what is this? And just delete it. So we thought, the more sign-offs we have on this process, like every time we had a review by someone, even if it was a review that threw us off the path and we had to go and rebuild a lot of stuff, it was like, once someone wants to delete this, I'll just go point to that discussion and put it right back in. So that was, it made the way a little longer, but it gave us like a ton of conversation to step on top of and say, yeah, you know what? This has been approved by the community. And afterwards we gained like core committed status, and now it was more like, if you delete it, I'll just go and put it right back in because I have merge rights. So that was like a sort of a promise to anyone else that is doing development on top of filters, is that we won't let a filter or an event just silently disappear, but we'll give the fight. And that came from that discussion. So yeah, thanks to you all, because you are the first line of defense. And the question was, sorry?
The core platform, what would you like to migrate?
Just a list of things. Everything that sits behind a feature flag right now is a candidate, but everything that sits behind a feature flag and is only used by one organization is a top candidate. So top of my head, I will say anything enterprise is something that should move into filters. Anything that synchronizes or that calls an API from something else, like course discovery, it's a candidate for events. And I'll leave it at those two, because otherwise we'll just be here all night, basically. SAP SuccessFactors, it makes no sense. Like all those sort of things belong behind a filter now, basically. And you could, just as we're having slots that are being refactored and put in the same repository just behind the slot, we could be doing the same, not taking it out of the core repositories now, but just putting it behind filters so that it's easier to remove later on. Yeah.
That's our time, but we can take one more question if there's any last question.
No.
You answered this a little bit in terms of what's next, but I'm just thinking about, like, for me, I think this technology is the obvious future of the platform. I'm so thankful to you guys for creating it and contributing it. The next thing I'm thinking about are, like, what would it take us to get to 1,000 published plugins that were used by more than one organization? What would it take us to get to commercially created plugins that firms, were adding value on top of open edX for users of the platform.
Absolutely, like that. That's hard to foresee from, like, that's 2 orders of magnitude from where we are now. And top of my mind, one of the things that I would like to see is, you remember that chart where edX has a bazillion commits, and most organizations don't. We want to see that flipped. Like, we don't want to be the only ones doing that, and probably we want that to be like lots of teams in the community from different organizations and different universities have the capacity to do this, and we're not the only ones maintaining it. So at least that. And then a second thing I'd like to see is put in the effort to get rid of SAP SuccessFactors, or like go and actually take some of the bits of code that are dragging us down and put them behind a filter and proper deprecate them, or have the organizations that use that sort of take it to their own repo and maintain it. Just 2 ideas.
Let's give Maria and Felipe another hand. Thanks, everyone.
In the slides, you find the references for like the code we used to scrap this.
This is the last session for the day, so thank you guys for coming. And reminder, in about 2 hours at 7 p.m. is our banquet down at the town hall. It's not here, but there will be a couple of shuttles from here. If you're closer to over there, or you find yourself over there, it's best to just go directly there and be there by 7 o'clock. If you're over here and you need a ride, there should be a couple of shuttles out front around 6:30. Yes, Omar.
What's the